Russian losses in the war against Ukraine reached a new monthly high in December 2024. These losses are driven by infantry assaults and are unlikely to decrease, according to the UK Ministry of Defence. December 2024 was likely the most costly month of the war for Russia, with a total of 48,670 casualties reported by the Ukraine General Staff. The summary stated, in November 2024, 45,680 Russian troop losses were recorded. December marked the sixth consecutive month in which Russian forces suffered higher losses than the previous month. In 2024, Russian forces suffered 429,660 casualties, representing a significant increase compared to the 252,940 casualties in 2023, according to a report by Ukraine's General Staff. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has lost over 790,000 personnel, the report says. According to British intelligence, the average daily losses of Russian troops reached a new monthly high of the war in December 2024. The average loss rate stood at 1,570 per day, marking the fifth consecutive month of higher than average daily losses. On December the 19th, 2024, a new record for the war was set with 2,200 casualties recorded in a single day. Russia will highly likely continue to experience high casualty rates over January 2025, with continued dismounted infantry attacks on multiple axes, the UK Ministry of Defence noted. The Russian government recently decided to forgive loans for those willing to sign military contracts. According to British intelligence, Russia's financial incentives for conscripts aim to ensure sufficient recruitment to compensate for its steadily rising losses. According to UK intelligence, Russia's financial incentives for recruits almost certainly aim to ensure sufficient replenishment for its losses, which continue to grow. The incentives are also almost certainly aimed at reducing the likelihood that Russia will need to conduct further mobilizations, which, according to the Russian leadership, harm public support for the war and increase the risk of further devastating large-scale emigration. The report states, writing off loan repayments will highly likely increase financial pressures on Russian banks into 2025, in addition to pressures from high interest rates and sanctions, the UK Ministry of Defence notes. Tank attacks on the front are becoming increasingly suicidal for the Russians and bring zero results due to the proliferation of attack drones. At the same time, writes Forbes analyst David Axe, this does not mean that Russian troops cannot advance. They are throwing infantry into the fight, supported by artillery and drones, slowly moving forward. As Michael Kaufman, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment in Washington, explains, the Russians are leaning toward a new infantry-first doctrine, partly to reduce equipment losses, but also because of the general inability to penetrate prepared defenses covered by ubiquitous reconnaissance and attack drones, since dispersed infantry is harder to defeat than long lines of vehicles. At the same time, some Russian commanders continue to send their tanks and infantry fighting vehicles into senseless banzai attacks. But, as Russian bloggers complain, they gain nothing, lose everything, and provide cheerful content for the Ukrainian armed forces. At the same time, the Russians' transition to infantry attacks forces the Ukrainians to repel these attacks with their own infantry. At the same time, in conditions of a shortage of people, in order to replenish losses and simultaneously form new units, the Ukrainian military began sending specialists from their auxiliary units to the front lines. Ironically, poaching drone operators to augment infantry units, a band-aid approach to countering Russian infantry attacks, risks weakening the very forces that forced the Russians to attack primarily on foot. If Ukrainian commanders send too many drone operators to the front lines to fight like infantry, they may inadvertently make Russian vehicles safer to attack again, the Forbes analyst notes. Since the beginning of the year alone, the Russian army has captured 8 villages south of the city of Pokrovsk, and according to Bild military observer Julian Robka, in just a few weeks, the war could spread to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Russian troops are 7 kilometers away from it. As military expert Ivan Stupak noted, Russian occupiers may attempt to carry out a large encirclement of Ukrainian defenders in the Donetsk region. We are talking about territories that are bordered on one side by Pokrovsk and on the other by Chasov Yar. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has stepped up his criticism of Russia, blaming it for the downing of the Azerbaijan Airlines plane, underscoring the growing rift between the countries and Moscow's waning influence in the post-Soviet space. The New York Times reports, Brazilian Air Force's Accident Investigation and Prevention Center completed decoding the black boxes of the crashed Azerbaijan Airlines plane. According to Brazilian media, the extraction and analysis of data from the recorders has already been completed and the information has been transferred to the Kazakh authorities. In the wake of these developments, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev sharply criticized Russia. He expressed confidence in the guilt of representatives of the Russian Federation for the crash and demanded justice, punishment of the guilty, and transparency of the investigation. Deviating from protocol, Aliyev made the statement in Russian so that his words would be heard in Moscow and by Russian-speaking relatives of the dead pilots. Despite Putin's December 28th apology for the tragic incident, Moscow has yet to acknowledge responsibility for the plane's downing. That has sparked outrage among pro-government voices in Azerbaijan, who have denounced Russia's imperial arrogance. Farid Shafiev, chairman of the Center for Analysis of International Relations, said Moscow continues to look down on former Soviet countries, which only deepens the rift. Across the former Soviet Union, Russia's grip is weakening. Armenia no longer looks to Russia as a guarantor of security, turning to the West and Iran. Central Asia is strengthening its ties with China, seeing a Russia weakened and battered by the war with Ukraine decrepit under the rule of a 72-year-old retired dictator, Putin. In Transnistria, the cutoff of gas supplies has threatened the region's loyalty to Moscow. The plane crash marked a turning point in relations between Baku and Moscow. Aliyev, confident in his position thanks to energy revenues and his victory over Armenia, is using the situation to further distance himself from Putin. The investigation initiated by Kazakhstan has also been welcomed in Azerbaijan. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev supported the transfer of the black boxes to Brazil, noting that this is the only way to ensure a fair and impartial investigation. The downing of the Azerbaijan Airlines plane has become further evidence of the limitations of the partnership between Azerbaijan and Russia, deepening the rift and highlighting Moscow's weakening influence in the region.